Paul Allen and I talked about how this computer can go everywhere, we came up with this phrase, a computer on every desk and in every home, and thought, wow, that's a business problem, that's going to change the world. Well, the business side always seemed pretty simple to me. In our space, understand, the amount of competition is ever increasing, and that's partly why I love my job.
When did you first come across computers?
Well, computers were pretty expensive and large when I was in school. I was 13 years old, and my school had a connection to a very expensive machine, and we paid by the minute. And I really got addicted to the idea of trying to get the machine to do something and figuring out what its limitations were. And that's when I fell in love with software.
I'd read somewhere that your mum had organized some kind of rummage sale to
Well, the Mothers Club at that school had funded the idea of having this computer terminal. And it was, by today's standards, I mean, completely ridiculous. You had to sit there and type things in, and it was all on paper. There was no screen at all, and the phone connection was about 1,000th the speed of what most people use today. So very limited, but it engaged me and some of my friends, including Paul Allen, who co-founded the company with me many years later, to really believe that this could be a tool, not just for big companies, but for everyone.
What was the first thing you did on computers?
Well, the early programs were playing Monopoly, which is a board game, playing Yahtzee, playing tic-tac-toe. Then I got in, my first serious application was the school asked me to schedule the classes, who would be in which classes, where they would meet, all of that kind of thing. And that was a fairly complex problem that really got my programming to a new level.
About how many hours a day were you doing on the computer?
Well, there were periods there where, 10, 12 hours a day I was just programming, and eventually people were paying me money to do the programming, which when you're 14 years old is a pretty cool thing, that people are paying you, tens of thousands of dollars a year just to do the thing you love to do.
Spending 10, 12 hours a day on a computer, what did Mum and Dad say about that?
Well, they were a little impatient in the sense that they had always wanted me to be well-rounded. They wanted me to go out and do sports and socialize a little bit. So they tried to keep me, somewhat into normal things.
What was it that brought you and Paul together? Why did you become so alike?
Well, we were a few years apart in school, and yet Paul was so curious about different things. He was always trying to figure out what could the computer do, and I was very good at math. I'd gotten the best scores in the school, and he thought, well, maybe this kid will help him explore it. And so we read a lot of books together, and we talked about this microprocessor, the miracle of the computer on a chip, and that's what got us thinking, wow, we should really be involved in this. And we understood the software piece better than the companies like Intel that were making the chips. And so we saw how those two could come together in a way that really no one else did.
What engaged you most about the idea of making programs? Was it the business side, i.e. making money, or was it actually the coding?
Well, the business side always seemed pretty simple to me. You know, if you make great software, you can figure out a way to get it out there and get people to buy it.
Yeah.
And so the thing that grabbed us and really made us sit there 12 hours a day was the fascination of how far could we go? You know, could we make a tool that we would love to use, that we would use to create documents and presentations and to communicate with? And that's always been the part I've loved, and I've always tried to make sure I spend as much of my time with the engineers as possible.
How much computing did you do whilst you were at Harvard?
Well, I played around with computers, but I didn't want to take any of the computer courses there because I felt I'd already learned all that stuff. In fact, I signed up for one, third-level graduate course, and I sat down and said, hey, I already know all this stuff. So I was a bit cocky about the computer things. I thought pure mathematics was what was really the cool thing, and it was a big challenge for me because there were so many smart people there in mathematics. And it was during that time at Harvard that I thought, wow, there's this one area where my skills really are world class, and there's a chance to make a big difference. In this math area, the chance that I would just be a professor off my own room and maybe may or may not advance math in a way that would really make a difference. I thought, well, there's quite a contrast here. Maybe this stuff I thought was so simple is what I really should push to its limits.
Were you as high up the league table on maths in Harvard as you were at school?
At Harvard, the first year, you go into a class which has about 100 people, all of whom have had perfect scores on their math tests. The U.S. has a thing called the SAT test. Everybody had an 800, which is the perfect score. And everyone's been the best at their school. And, this is a class of 100 people, so it's kind of intimidating. Some friends and I did pretty well. I was the third in the class. My friend was the best. And then we took an exam, which is nationwide, which I was in the top 100, but not the top. And so I loved math, and I thought, boy, I can do it really well. But compared to the computer thing, it wasn't quite the same, because I had been thinking about computers day and night since age 13. And in some ways, the thing that you're obsessed with, that's Bobby Fischer at chess, or great scientists, great musicians. That's where you're world class.
Who came up with the name Microsoft?
I came up with that name. We had lots of crazy names, and Paul and I brainstormed, but that one was my idea.
You wrote BASIC for the first personal computer, the Altair.
Right.
Did you make much money out of that?
Well, at first we didn't, because we did a structure with the company involved. They were really broke. They had no money. We did a structure where we got a royalty, and it was on this paper tape. Well, the people who bought those computers were sort of anti-business people, and so they would copy the tape and not pay us all that much. But eventually the computers got good enough that business users started buying them, and people understood that paying for software was probably a good thing, a lot of people. And so after about the third year, we did pretty well. The first couple of years, it looked tough.
Didn't you also write for, was it Commodore and the Apple II? But I read that you'd actually sold the Apple II BASIC for about 2 cents per license.
Well, let's see. I got a fee of $31,000, and
they sold millions.
Yeah, they got a good deal.
Did that actually affect the way you did your business deals later on? Watching that you only got $31,000 out of the
the whole thing we thought was, if we can make this industry big, first hundreds of thousands, then millions, then tens of millions, and now over 100 million PCs are sold every year, we can hire the smartest people and do massive R&D, spend billions on it, and still sell the software for a super low price. So we saw that model where we could gather together great scientists, and it got us very excited. So we knew we had to grow the business. We knew we had to make the PC something more and more people would want.
You hired Steve Ballmer in 1980 to find the smartest people.
Well, that was part of his job. He came in when we had about 30 people, and the number of companies that wanted to do business with us was overwhelming. And we sort of didn't know when to say yes, when to say no. We were a little disorganized in how we managed things, and I thought Steve could really help us get straightened out. Well, he came in and said, wow, I need to hire like 100 more people. And I thought, well, I can't afford 100 more people because I was very conservative financially. There wasn't venture capital out there like there is today for anyone. So I told Steve, okay, go ahead and hire as fast as you can, but let's see if we can't grow the company into the size that you want us to have, because it's going to be tough to find the kind of people that we need. So he got going. He did a great job on that, but the company grew enough that I never had to tell him to stop.
Well, that brings us to 1981, 12th of August, launch of the PC. Maybe you could walk us through how it was that IBM came to you and asked you to write PC-DOS. And you became very famous.
It's a famous thing. And well, we were in every personal computer at that point. The Apple II, the Commodore, the TRS-80. These are the famous machines of the time. We weren't in the Sinclair and one or two obscure others, but we were in most
Sinclair
of them.
wasn't obscure? It's British.
Well, it was a fine machine, but it didn't use our BASIC. In any case, so when IBM was putting together this tiny little task force to say, okay, let's dabble in this area, they came to us and said, hey, couldn't we work together? Because the main reason they were doing this task force was to prove that inside this huge company they could get a product done in a short period of time, not because they saw a big market. And the method they decided to use to get something done quickly was to rely on some outside companies. So Intel for the chips and Microsoft for the software. And we convinced them to do something outrageous, which was to use a 16-bit processor. And that was more powerful than the machines of the time. And so that machine became the model for this 16-bit era. In fact, most of the machines eventually became very, very compatible with that IBM machine. And so, with us providing the BASIC, the DOS, and everything, that really grew our business quite a bit.
The really big deal of Microsoft's success was the fact that you were allowed to make MS-DOS off the back of a PC-DOS and sell it to the growing clone market. Was that deal, that tick in the box from IBM, as big to you then as it really has become now?
Well, there are many milestones in our history. Getting BASIC up as a standard product in the 8-bit era. Then MS-DOS became our key product for many years there. And working with IBM was a key element of that. We knew when we structured that deal with IBM we were going to license it to everybody else, and we were very clear to them about that. And that was the business we were in.
But 2 questions here. That was very unusual from IBM, wasn't it, that they would give you that? Did you know it was going to go meteoric the way it did?
Well, we believed that it would. Even more than the people at IBM. It was a strange project in that sense, because we, as the provider of the software, had more enthusiasm about it than most people at IBM. Understand, this was a renegade project at IBM. It was a very small group, and only after the PC started to sell about 10 times what they'd predicted did they think, wow, how does this affect their strategy? They had to discontinue a number of products. They had a word processing product and a small business product, which the PC just wiped those things out. Then they put a lot of resources into it, eventually didn't move as fast as some of the other people, and lost the number one position that they'd had there. But we thought that machine would be a key machine, and Intel felt the same way. So that was where that partnership
Everyone saw
got
the writing
going.
on the wall except IBM, basically.
Well, no, well there were people at IBM who saw it, and it's easy to be optimistic when you're a small company like that, when you believe in something the way we did. The statement that we had about computing was so revolutionary. None of the computer companies would have believed that the key software would come from a non-computer company, from a pure software company run by some kids up in Seattle. I mean, that just wasn't in their mindset.
Was it a difficult decision to make to bring out Windows? Because you'd already got the market sewn up with DOS.
Well, we knew that things would change. That's the thing that's great about our business is none of the products we sell in any year are going to last more than 3 or 4 years. Now, if we do a good job, we can replace them with something more powerful. And so this idea that you just had characters on the screen versus having any type of image, so-called graphical interface, we fell in love with that idea. The pioneering work in the research lab had actually been done at Xerox. And there, even though they failed to productize it, that concept infected Apple, infected Microsoft, a number of other companies. We even hired a number of the top people from Xerox, people like Charles Simone. And so we said, how can we do this? The problem was that the PCs were too slow. They didn't have enough memory. The processor wasn't fast enough. And it's a lot harder to do these graphical screens than just put the characters up there. So when we first came out with Windows, even though it took a lot longer to develop than we expected, it didn't really catch on. It took really until 1990 before people could say, hey, graphics interface, this is clearly the way things are going to go. This is the way software should be built. So we spent from 1985 till 1990 going around and saying, come on, get behind this. And even some of the other software companies were very, very slow to back the idea.
Is it fair to say that the PC itself was part of the problem? You say that it wasn't very powerful. The Macintosh had already got a graphical user interface and was actually making it work in about, what, 84, 85?
Well, yes and no. Remember that the 1984 Macintosh, which is a machine I love, actually stopped selling. It was a 128K machine, and so people could only do a few applications. It didn't have much storage, it didn't have expandability, and so even though they were very clever, I mean, Apple deserves immense credit for what they did, and they used that 68,000 processor, the machine was still limited. It was a little bit better than the Lisa, which had come before it and absolutely failed, but still graphical computing, even for Apple, didn't take off until probably 87, 88, where people saw this is there. It took laser printing. Adobe came along with PageMaker. We fleshed out all of our applications, including Excel, for the Macintosh. That was a big milestone there. And so in the 80s, we were all at risk, all of us who'd bet our companies on a graphics interface. And then by 1990, it really started to pay off.
We're on to, well, now. What is the next version of Windows coming up?
We moved from the original Windows to Windows NT, which is the industrial strength Windows. And that was another one of those struggles where people said at first, you couldn't build something that had the power of Unix, but also the friendliness of a Windows type system. So that's been a huge foundation for us. Now we need to take that and prove to people that even the biggest systems, where they would have used mainframes in the past, they can now use Windows, because the power of the chip, the capacities of these systems are quite incredible. And so we're building that kind of reliability and scalability in. So we're moving up to the very high end to do things on the internet where there's more transactions than you've ever had to deal with before. We're also moving down to the very small devices, a little palm-sized device that you carry in your pocket, something that you'd have in your TV set or in your car. And that's what we call Windows CE for the consumer side of things.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like Windows 2000 is Windows on steroids. Will you need a suitably powerful machine to run it?
Oh, Windows NT requires a bit of a more powerful machine. You can run it with 32 megabytes. Most people run it now with 64 megabytes, although that's becoming typical. About half of Windows in business today is now this more powerful version of Windows. The internet isn't standing still. I mean, people say, well, okay, aren't you done adopting to the internet? Well, the internet isn't done changing, and we're part of one of the companies that's pushing that forward.
I mean, a lot of people are selling services off the internet. Do you think there's money in there hills?
Well, that's sort of a $1 trillion question in terms of the way companies are jumping in and getting very high valuations. And if anybody has an opinion about that, they can buy these stocks or short these stocks. I don't think anybody really has the answer. We know that the internet is going to help consumers. It's going to let them find products they wouldn't have found before, get better prices than they would have gotten before. The fact is that the competition here is more intense than anywhere else, because setting up a website is now just buying some boxes of software and buying a very low-cost PC server from the great companies that do that work, and boom, you're up there. You're just like everybody else. And so what those business models look like, that's in a constant state of refinement. The profit margins will be under attack just because you'll have so many entrants into the field.
I've also read that you said that the internet will take longer to evolve. Is that true?
Well, certainly the internet is very much at the beginning of what it can achieve. I mean, we don't have wireless devices. We don't have these tablet devices. Most homes, if they're connected at all, are using a phone dial-up, which is a little bit slow. And so, we haven't seen anything yet. People aren't incorporating it into their lifestyle, but they will. And so the rewards, the companies who really do their job right, that the rewards are out there in the future. That's partly why people have these big valuations, is because they're anticipating that some of these companies will be there when the business is 50 times what it is today.
Perhaps you could explain for people what is the deal between you and the DOJ.
Well, the DOJ is trying to say that when we put new features into Windows, that maybe we shouldn't be allowed to do that. One of the features we put in is support for the internet. We saw the internet coming as a fantastic thing, really in some ways a realization of the vision that we had of information at our fingertips and all this communication. But it caught us by surprise how it bubbled along at a very low level, and then all of a sudden in 95, 96 just took off. So we built that into the PC operating system so you could buy a machine and get onto the internet very easily. And what they're saying is we shouldn't have done that innovation, that we shouldn't have integrated it in, that we should have made people buy it and install it as a separate product, that we shouldn't have brought the price for that down and just had it there as a no extra cost feature. The irony of that is pretty strong, and it's a pretty fundamental principle for us to be able to add new things into Windows because the operating system, what people expect of it, is always changing. They'll expect speech in the future. They'll expect vision in the future. And so we're just at the beginning of what we need to do there. So we're being forced to say, although we're successful, we're allowed to innovate.
So, and how did it go?
Well, the case is ongoing. The U.S. court system is not a fast process. In fact, I can guarantee you that no matter what goes on, there'll be many, many years before anything comes to a final conclusion. In the meantime, it's key to understand there's nothing holding us back in terms of improving the system, hiring the great people, moving ahead, because the opportunities now and the competition now is as intense as it's ever been.
In the court case itself, would you do anything different from the way you've done it already?
Well, there's nothing that we look back on and say we would have done any differently. Our commitment to the internet, our commitment to bring those capabilities to people without charging them extra, that is the most pro-consumer thing we've ever done.
But the actual court case, the whole thing about the video evidence, certainly what the press was saying was that you came over not very well. Do you regret doing the video evidence?
Well, I'm not involved actually in the court case. We did a video that proved exactly what we'd said, which is that the internet capabilities are really tightly integrated into the system. When you get help text, it's the internet thing. And the government attacked that video, and so our guy, incredible guy, stayed up all night and made one himself that showed all those things again without any of the confusion they'd managed to introduce. So I think we came out of that super well. The press is always going to be tough on companies that are successful like we are. That's the name of the game. We've been in that for many, many years. And as long as we're driving the products forward and getting people excited about computing, we're doing what we love.
What will happen if you lose?
Well, the fact is that innovation has allowed companies in the United States to lead in this whole internet thing. And that principle is a very important principle. I have no doubt that principle will be upheld. You don't have to do any contingency planning. We've been picked as the people who have to go out and show how important that is, and we will do that.
They split up AT&T, didn't they? Would you think they would try that with Microsoft?
No. AT&T was a government-created situation where they were given a government monopoly, and nobody could compete in that space. In our space, understand, the amount of competition is ever increasing, and that's partly why I love my job, because we've got to do new things. We've got to make it easier to use, more powerful, less expensive. We've got to go into these new form factors, and we're full speed ahead.
But we're starting to do all the planning for the next version and to decide what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So any foreshadowing of what's coming would be helpful, because then we can figure out what's going on.
It's on this micro CD. It's just a little 10-line.
Right. I think that's going to be. They demoed both of those, Brad. Like he was showing the CE.
Hi, can I help you?
Oh, right, okay. So what kind of mouse does this snake like? Is it like the two-button mouse, or
Fairly large rats.
PS2
Probably
mouse?
about this long. Oh, very cute.
Yeah.
He was asking us specifically some questions about how our recalc engine worked, and he was comparing it with an old version of Excel that he was familiar with.
Do you kind of give him new tips now, or does he give you new tips?
He usually gives us tips. The guy's pretty on the ball.
Last year, you handed over the reins to Steve Ballmer, and he's now the man. Why did you do that?
Well, I'm still the CEO.
Oh, okay.
Steve,
You're still involved. I know that.
Steve got the president's title, which is important to me because I saw as our business was expanding, the amount of time I got with the product groups was dropping actually below half of my time. And so I asked Steve to step up and take over all the business management for me, and that way I could reallocate my time. Still getting out to customers, but all the rest of the time would be with the engineers. And you know, as I look back, I'm sure glad I did that. It was very important for us to start to put some things into place. So it's been a huge success. You know, Steve is my best friend, and it's a great pleasure to have him helping me out that way.
You once said that being a businessman isn't rocket science. There's got to be something special. Do you believe it's not rocket science?
Well, business is pretty simple in terms of, you know, get your sales to be large and your costs to be small, and subtract those two numbers.
I'll go and do it now. That's fine. Yeah, it's easy.
And you know, we succeeded because of the technology and a vision behind that technology. Now we have to keep renewing that edge, and I have to say, you know, every year I think, wow, you know, this year is the year we really have to show people new capabilities. That's very intense right now because seeing our success, lots of companies come in, whether it's IBM. IBM's value is not as high as ours, but they have 10 times as many employees as we do, and they have 5 times the sales that we do. So in a lot of ways, they are still the giant of the computer industry and a very intense competitor of us and our partners.
Is it then that business skills aren't the issue? It's what makes the edge that is the issue?
Well, the things really have to come together. I mean, they're not totally divorced, but if our products weren't, you know, if we didn't have the best engineers building those products, then the whole thing doesn't make sense. I mean, that's true of, you know, take a pharmaceutical company. I don't care how sharp their businessmen are, if they don't come up with the breakthrough drugs that are solving diseases, there's nothing there. And if they do that, well, okay, you can miss 20 or 30% of the opportunity, but you're going to do pretty darn well. Our business is like that, where if we're the first to do speech recognition right and handwriting devices, which are some of the things we're investing in now, we're going to keep doing very well. If we let other people do that better than us, ahead of us, then we deserve to shrink.
Your new book, Business at the Speed of Thought, which has the interesting subtitle, Using a Digital Nervous System. What is a digital nervous system?
Well, the idea is that you want to move information inside a company. And not just inside, but also out to the customers and to the partners. And there's a way of doing this using digital approaches that'll be far more efficient and effective than just having all that paperwork, having to wait till somebody can get on the phone. Instead, if you keep track of all your interactions with your customers, you can provide better service, you can make faster decisions. And so the premise is that business is changing and that all businesses should think about how they can take advantage of these tools.
You also, in the book, you talk about Sloan in General Motors. Why was that so interesting for you?
Well, in that era of business, General Motors was the company that really thought about how to manage, how to use information to their advantage. Of course, they didn't have the internet back then, but Sloan figured out how to know what was selling on the dealer lots, and just in a day's time always had that information coming back to headquarters so they could adjust what they're doing based on the market and customer feedback. So the approaches he used inside General Motors to make it the modern corporation, those same basic principles apply here. You've got to get as much information as you can and look at it as broadly as you can, and now we can do it 1,000,000 times better than he could.
What company now do you think best fits into the ideal that you put in the book?
Well, no company, I think, has really moved itself fully into the information age. I think most companies still have paper forms, particularly the larger companies. You know, the advantage of size is you can do big projects, but it makes it harder to get coordinated. There are some new companies that have really started with the PC and the internet as a given. You know, they know that's there, and so they design all the information flow around it. Probably some of those smaller companies are the closest to achieving the ideal.
Do you think that you have to be a new company to do it then? I mean, do you think...
No, it's just easier when you start from scratch. Most companies aren't new companies, and yet, you know, we really want everyone to get the benefit of this. And there is a way to do it a step at a time. And that's why in the book, I take companies that aren't all the way there, but they've taken a department or they've taken a project, used this digital approach, and had fantastic results. And that's so that people can see, hey, it works, and it doesn't have to be totally revolutionary.
Can you give us a typical day in the life of Bill Gates?
Well, if I'm here at our headquarters, I come in, I have meetings most of the day, which are brainstorming meetings about new product areas that we're doing, typically an hour to 2 hours long. I'll have a customer coming in most days, go over and meet with them as part of a day-long event they're part of. I'll be talking to some people about how we organize, doing one-on-one meetings for people who I think should be excited about some of the new things. Do quite a bit of email. I'll get internally, 60 to 100 messages a day, and I want to either read them or respond to those in a thoughtful way.
How many do you write off the back of that?
Oh, I write maybe 50 messages a day.
15?
50.
Whoa.
Email is big here, and a lot of those messages are very short, where you can just say yes, no, whatever it is. Then I try and get home by 7 or so I can get a couple hours with my daughter, and she goes to bed, and then most nights I'll go back up and get a couple more hours of electronic mail.
What time do you start?
I don't get in that early. My first meeting's usually at 8:30 because I've been up, on the computer sometimes, certainly until 11 or 12.
Your wife must really enjoy your job.
Well, she makes sure that I take time off on weekends, and some evenings it's not quite as email-oriented.
I also read that you're giving away money a lot these days. I mean, what is all that about? Perhaps you could talk us through that.
Well, I feel very lucky to have had the success I've had, and I want to take these resources and give them back to society in a way that can have a positive impact.
Are you going to be as good as giving away money as you are at making it?
Well, we'll see. I At one point I thought I would wait until my 60s to do this, but as I learned about some of the needs, I thought, no, I really have to try and do both at once. Mostly my job, but also the philanthropy, where I've had my father and my wife have gotten very involved and helped out in that. So I've got a foundation now with about $6 billion in it, and so that we're giving away a little over $300 million a year. Things like children's vaccines, that's the biggest project we've done, is getting those vaccines out to everyone. Also, some things about information empowerment, getting PCs into libraries. We're doing some things to help there. And so, I'm learning about that and seeing that there's a lot of ways that I can help out.
What's the next big thing?
Oh, speech and handwriting.
Yeah.
The idea of a tablet, the quality is good enough that you would really read a long document off of it. Even you'd read a book off of it. That's coming in a few years, and we're hard at work to make sure our software does that in a great way.
Is the hardware there yet for that?
No, it's about 2 or 3 years away. So I think the hardware and software are just going to come together. Also, the prices have to come down a fair bit. We've demonstrated using prototype hardware this idea of software that lets things be far more readable, and that's got people very excited.
How much is the success of Microsoft and all the other high-tech companies down to the convergence of the hardware to enable you to showcase your software?
Well, there's a partnership here where the hardware people need us to write software that shows off what they can do, and we need the better hardware to push forward to make it so you can do collaboration across the globe, or you can get voice. You go to a website, you can talk to somebody as well as navigating pages. Those are just 2 things that we're solving this year and make a big difference. The sales are both to people in business and to people at home, and although the people at home thing in the long run will be the biggest impact, it's to people in business today is the largest part of that our business.
You have other interests now, something to do with low-orbit satellites. Talk us through that.
Well, the idea here is, how do you get every point on the globe connected up to the internet? When you have a lot of people in a city, you can run these optic fibers and eventually get incredible speeds. But for people out in the rural areas, how can they participate? Well, Craig McCaw, who is a pioneer of cellular telephony and incredibly successful, found some people who wanted to do it with these low Earth orbit satellites. He called me up and I helped fund it, and so Craig and I are the main owners of this company called Teledesic. It's separate from Microsoft. It's a fun thing, but it's not something I get much time on because my focus is here at Microsoft. Still, I'm very excited about what they're doing. In the next 3 or 4 years, they should be able to launch these satellites and connect everybody up, so that if you want to live out in the rural areas, you'll be able to video conference in, see plays. In fact, it might make that choice more attractive.
What do you think Microsoft will be in 25 years' time?
Well, 25 years in the technology business is one heck of a long time. And 25 years from now, it's certain that someone else will be the CEO of Microsoft and taking on the challenges there. In order to be the leader over that period of time, we will have had to reinvent ourselves many, many times. In technology, that's proven tough to do. Microsoft's done it about 3 times, which is close to a record. I think I understand how we'll do it the 4th and 5th time, but that still doesn't get you out 25 years.
Do you think that the 6th and 7th time you reinvent yourself, you'll still be a software company?
Oh, yes. Software is what we love. Software is what we're good at. and the potential of software to make better tools, whether it's running on tiny little devices or gigantic devices. So the importance of software, that's not going away.
What would you like to be remembered for?
Well, I don't think anybody lives to be remembered. I mean, I live to live, not because of something that happens after I die. I think the PC era will be remembered very positively because it was a period of great innovation of a product that affected the masses and empowered the masses like no product before. And it really ushered in this information age. It allowed the internet to get to critical mass. And so having a chance to have been part of that, I feel very lucky.
Have you customized the desktop on your computer?
Sure.
And what wallpaper do you have on it?
Oh, I have my little girl, Jennifer.
What was the last piece of Microsoft software to contain a line of Bill Gates' code?
Microsoft Basic still has some of my code.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
I'd say Star Wars.
Do you ever sleep in?
On weekends. I like to sleep in.
Okay. During the week?
No, during the week I do not.
What product are you most proud of?
Microsoft Excel, Windows NT. It's hard. It's like picking your favorite children.
Would you ever run for president?
No.